On February 10, 1998, emergency services responded to a domestic violence call in Fargo, North Dakota. They arrived on the scene to discover a semi-conscious woman who bore signs of severe injuries and mutilation consistent with torture. The bedroom where she was found was a scene of horror: blood-stained ligatures, bedding, clothing, and a variety of weapons, including a baseball bat, a hatchet, a kitchen knife, a machete, and dumbbell plates were scattered around, all bearing evidence of use. At the center of the room stood a large, shattered mirror, its broken glass strewn across the floor. One shard, approximately 8 inches long and 3 inches wide, was lodged deep in the victim's stomach. The victim, clearly delirious, told officers, "My boyfriend did this to me. But it's not his fault. He was crazy, and the mirror made him crazier." Despite extensive searches, no other individual was found at the scene, not even the victim's boyfriend. To this day, he remains missing and is officially listed as such. EMS swiftly transported the woman to the hospital where emergency surgery commenced. However, despite all medical interventions, the wound caused by the mirror shard would not heal. Though the bleeding was controlled, the injury remained an open, unhealed cavity in her abdomen. 2 weeks into her hospital stay, an unsettling incident occurred. One of the nurses attending to the victim ran out of her room in hysterics, refusing to return. When questioned, the nurse claimed that during wound care, she had looked inside the patient's wound and saw a room. According to the nurse, the patient was somehow inside this room, smiling back at her. The patient, still mentally unstable and physically fragile from her ordeal, was unable to provide any further explanation. Shortly thereafter, she was taken for a specialized study with the goal of finally closing her wound. The details of this study are unsettling and largely irrelevant here. What's important is that the medical professionals studying her also reported seeing the same room inside her wound. A disturbing incident linked to this discovery prompted hospital staff to transfer the woman to the custody of AHH NASCU. From that day forward, the patient, now identified as Ms. Pauley, has been under the agency's care. Ms. Pauley possesses a truly astonishing ability. She is the keeper of an open-ended pocket dimension. This dimension manifests as a living room with mirror-paneled walls. According to Ms. Pauley, it is an exact replica of the living room from her childhood home, save for the mirrors. The entrance to this pocket reality is wound in Ms. Pauley's abdomen, caused by the mirror shard. Both she and the agency agree that the extraordinary properties of the wound stem directly from the mirror. Despite thorough searches, no additional shards of the mirror have ever been found. This pocket dimension features a front door that opens to different locations. Actually, Ms. Pauley claimed to have no control over where the door led. However, following the recent escape of inmate 70, known as the man who never smiles, the agency discovered the truth. Not only does Ms. Pauley know where the door leads, she can control it. Ms. Pauley was not disciplined for the containment breach involving inmate 70 due to his unique abilities. However, on December 14, 2024, she was caught trying to help another inmate, inmate 22, nicknamed Lifeblood, escape. It was inmate 22 herself who reported Ms. Pauley's actions, albeit with visible distress over the consequences her friend might face. As a result, Ms. Pauley was fitted with a device that suppresses her ability to open or close her pocket dimension. When the device is active, her wound appears healed, and the dimension is entirely sealed off. This device is monitored personally by the agency director. At present, Ms. Pauley is a 51-year-old woman, standing 5'9", tall with brown hair and blue eyes. She suffers from major depressive disorder and anxiety, despite undergoing extensive therapy and adhering to her treatment plan. She continues to experience significant distress whenever she encounters a mirror. Historically, Ms. Pauley has been highly cooperative with agency directives. However, due to recent incidents, her classification has been downgraded to uncooperative. Nonetheless, at the director's discretion, she retains T-class status, albeit under strict restrictions. Interview subject: Pauley pocket classification. String: uncooperative, destructible, Gaian, and constant. Low. Epily interviewers: Raquel B. Cristobal. Interview date: 12/21/2024. My boyfriend used to talk to mirrors. Ms. Pauley began. He told me it was a coping mechanism he developed as a kid. I had my own strange coping mechanisms, so I understood. I didn't like it. Mirrors have always made me uneasy, but I understood. But talking to the mirror wasn't the only strange thing he did, and it wasn't the scariest, not by a long shot. Crazy's a bad word, especially for people like me. I hate using it, even now. But looking back, Philip was crazy. At the time, though, his particular kind of crazy felt familiar. He felt comfortable. He felt like home. And everyone wants to find home, me included. So what are you supposed to do when crazy feels like home? No one else has ever felt like home to me. Only him, and he wasn't a monster, far from it. He was sweet and thoughtful, stable enough to gain custody of his baby sister, Alice, who adored him. They had the same spectacular pale green eyes. Most importantly, Philip was sure about me. From the start, he showed it every day. He told me he knew we were meant to be from our very first conversation. Like he'd known me his entire life, or that we'd known each other in 1,000 prior lives. I didn't believe in past lives, of course, but I believed the way he treated me, and he treated me extremely well. The pocket in my heart was where I buried every fear and doubt I had about Philip. It was also where I stifled every instinct. That urged me to leave him. There were so many of those instincts, far too many, but the heart pocket was magical, expanding to hold every bad feeling I couldn't handle. One night, after an especially unhinged fight, I could almost feel the pocket growing. It stretched from my chest to my hips, displacing organs and grazing along my bones. I was convinced I could press on my stomach and feel its weight, heavy and solid, filled with the darkness that threatened to swallow my light. I hated our fights. I hated how they made me feel, how they made him feel, how they never seemed to be about anything important. I hated that Alice had to listen to them. But most of all, I hated what came afterward. The way Philip talked to the mirror, no matter how he justified it. As a coping mechanism, it only ever seemed to make him worse. One day, shortly after New Year's, the fighting started as soon as we woke up. Nothing I did could stop it. Everything I said seemed to pour fuel on the fire, escalating until it snowballed into something massive and uncontrollable. Deep in my chest, I felt it. This was heading toward disaster. That night, Philip didn't come to bed. Instead, he stayed in the bathroom, murmuring to the mirror. What I heard made my blood run cold. He kept repeating, "Every life, we kill each other." Kenny said he needed to sever the soul tie, that pain was the only way to do it. His words echoed in my ears. Pain is the only way. The greater the pain, the cleaner the cut. You have to do it. It's the only way to end this forever. It's the only way to save each other. I tried to shove my tear into the heart pocket, but it wouldn't fit. It surged through my veins, electrifying and unstoppable. Finally, at 3 a.m, I couldn't take it anymore. I confronted him. Philip fell apart completely. He alternated between screaming and begging, grabbing me and slamming me against the wall, before collapsing at my feet. He begged for forgiveness, told me we were cursed, and said the angel in the mirror had revealed it to him. He swore the angel never lied. "I love you," he sobbed. "I love you so much. And I'll do anything to break this curse, anything to sever the soul tie, anything to set us free." The look in his eyes made it clear he was about to hurt me. I acted without thinking. I pulled Alice out of bed, finding her already awake and crying. Her green eyes were puffy and red, swimming with tears. I bundled her into her coat and carried her to the car. Outside, the snow was falling in thick sheets, the wind howling as it tore through our clothes. The driveway was a sheet of ice, and we struggled to reach the car. Philip came after us, screaming for us to stop, begging us to stay, so he could save us once and for all. Even as I sped away, I saw him in the rearview mirror, a frantic shadow chasing the car, until the road curved and I left him behind. The storm raged. Snow blinded me, the wind hurling it in waves that obscured everything. I was already frazzled, barely holding it together. 10 minutes after leaving the house, I hit a patch of ice. The car spun out of control. Alice screamed. Everything went black. When I woke up, I was in a hospital bed. Philip was slumped in a chair beside me, pale and motionless, as though drained of life. I tried to call his name, but my head swam, and I faded back into unconsciousness. When I woke again, the doctors told me I would recover. It was a miracle I had survived. Alice hadn't. Philip didn't blame me. Somehow he didn't blame me. It's horrible to admit, but losing Alice changed him. The fight stopped. The screaming stopped. Everything stopped. In their place was a hopeless kind of gentleness. Philip no longer did any of the small, thoughtful things I had loved about him, so I started doing them myself. But bedtime stories? That had been Philip's thing. I couldn't bring myself to tell them. It felt like a betrayal I couldn't explain. Only one thing stayed the same: the mirror. Philip still talked to it. Sometimes it sounded like he wasn't alone, like there were two voices. He spoke so quietly I couldn't make out the words. But one morning, almost a year after Alice's death, I heard him clearly. He was crying. "How am I supposed to hurt her?" he asked the mirror. "How can you expect me to do this?" His voice softened again, returning to that indistinguishable murmur. That day I almost left, but I didn't. The next morning, Philip woke me with toast and coffee, something he hadn't done in 2 years. He smiled, laughed, and became the man I had fallen in love with. That night, after I climbed into bed, he brought me tea. As I sipped, he finally told me another bedtime story. It was about Akrasia and Kairos. Akrasia loved Kairos, but he wouldn't marry her. Desperate, she bargained with Hinthala, the god of mirrors, offering her green-eyed father as payment to make Kairos love her. Hinthala accepted, and Kairos loved Akrasia until the end of time, but he still wouldn't marry her, choosing his wealth and family over her. On his wedding night, Akrasia drowned herself in the sea. Kairos grieved, but never regretted his choice. "This story is about us," Philip said softly. I felt sick. Somehow, I knew this was his way of ending things. Tears welled in my eyes. "So what, am I Akrasia?" "No." He cupped my face, his thumb brushing away my tears. "You were Kairos." For the second time, I saw death in his eyes. Before I realized it, I was out of bed. The floor spun, tilting and stretching, and I collapsed. Philip lunged forward and pinned me down. I struggled, but my movements made everything worse. The world flipped upside down, like I was clinging to a ceiling about to give way. I felt like a porcelain doll about to shatter. "It's going to be okay," Philip said, his voice trembling but resolute. He knelt before me, his hands cold against my skin. "I promise. Listen. Please listen. I'm doing this because I love you. I have to sever our tie, for your sake and for mine. We find each other in every life. It should be beautiful, but it's not. We always destroy each other and everyone around us." The mirror told me. The mirror never lies. If I'd listened to it, Alice would be alive, and you would be happy somewhere else. I know it. I know it. His words were like knives, cutting deep even, as I struggled to comprehend their full weight. My body, heavy and sluggish, betrayed me. The tea he'd given me, it was laced with something that rendered me helpless. Philip moved with a purpose I couldn't stop, tying me down as I writhed weakly against the restraints. He worked methodically, explaining his every move, his voice shaking but firm. "Memories don't transfer, but essence does. We have to make our essence. Remember, the only way to do that is suffering. We have to make it hurt so badly that our essences repulse each other in the next life and every life that comes after. It's the only way we'll be happy, by making sure we never love each other." He stepped back, his words echoing in the dim room. My head spun as I tried to fight, to think, to understand. Then Philip left, the door closing behind him with a soft, deliberate click. Time stretched and blurred. A minute, an hour, days? I couldn't tell. The world tilted and swayed, my thoughts muddled and thick. When he returned, he was carrying the mirror. He placed it carefully on the dresser, angling it so I could see myself. Then, standing at the foot of the bed, he began to tell a story. His voice was distant, distorted, but I clung to the sound, trying to anchor myself in the chaos. A long time ago, two homeless orphans were best friends, a beautiful and very angry girl, and a sad little boy with a green-eyed cat that he loved more than anything. Except the girl, all they had was each other. They slept during the day to avoid those who might prey on two small children alone. In the world, they woke at sunset and traveled at night, stealing fruit from moonlit orchards and eggs from sleepy chickens in their coops. But when winter came, the orchards died and the chickens stopped laying. The children were soon starving. One bitter morning, the girl left the boy and his green-eyed cat sleeping in a barn and revealed herself to the farmer. The farmer welcomed her into his house, but he did not help her. When the boy woke to find the girl gone, he thought she had abandoned him, so he cried. But then his green-eyed cat hurried to the barn door, mowing. When the boy left the barn, he heard the girl screaming from inside the farmhouse. His little cat found a way inside through a broken window and led him through dusty, sunlit rooms to a door, behind which he heard the girl weeping. She was in a terrible state, but he helped her to her feet. The cat led them back through the dusty, sunlit rooms to the broken window. The cat jumped onto the sill, but lost her balance and fell back. She knocked a pot to the floor, where it shattered. The sound alerted the farmer. As he came crashing down the stairs, the boy helped the girl through the window. He tried to follow, but the farmer caught him. The boy's last memory was the sound of his cat meowing as he died. The girl tried to save him, but she was too late and too wounded besides, and died for her trouble. And Philip's voice faltered as he finished, tears streaming down his face. He bent down and picked up a baseball bat. The sight of it made me scream, my voice raw and wild with terror. Philip cried harder. "I'm sorry," he whispered. "I'm so sorry." And then he swung the bat. Pain erupted, white hot and searing, as he brought it down on my knee, once, twice, 3 times. The agony was unbearable. A tidal wave of torment that swallowed me whole. My screams echoed, distant and faint in my ears, as the room spun and darkened. Across from me, the mirror gleamed like a dark pool at night, ominous and alive. I imagined teeth inside it, sharp and cruel, bared in a sinister smile. Philip wept as he turned to the mirror, speaking to it in a trembling voice. I couldn't make out his words over the roar of my own pain, but his tone was pleading, desperate. I focused inward, searching for an escape from the unbearable reality. Slowly, torturously, I let go. I let the pain, the fear, the dizziness fall away, dropping them into the pocket of my heart. By the time Philip had finished his conversation with the mirror and curled up beside me, whispering broken apologies, I was already slipping into an uneasy, dreamless sleep. When I woke the next day, he was ready with another story. I ran blindly to the stack of battered boxes in the corner, dumped one out, and vomited everything inside me into the box. The box swelled and undulated as if it would burst open, but it held. When I was done, I closed up the box. Then I shuffled back across the room, sat down in front of the blaring TV, and continued to eat my cereal. Philip came back a while later to tell me yet another story about how our other selves did nothing but ruin each other and everyone around them. I don't remember what it was about because the moment I saw him, I opened the door to my heart room and hid inside. This became our pattern. For days, maybe weeks, maybe even months, every day, Philip told me some awful bedtime story where some man, woman, or child destroyed the person who loved them most out of cowardice, calculation, or terror. After every story, he hurt me. After he hurt me, he cried, insisting that the pain was another blow against the soul tie. He promised that once it was cut, we would finally be free. And in the scheme of eternity, all of this would be nothing but a bad dream. Then he would talk to the mirror, and the mirror would talk back. No matter how deeply I hid in the pocket room beside my heart, no matter how loudly I crunched cereal or turned up the TV, I always heard the mirror talk back. That terrified me. The whole point of my pocket room was to protect myself, to preserve my sanity, to make sure I got out of this alive. But even my room couldn't shield me from the fact that Philip's mirror always talked back. Philip got worse and worse. I barely noticed. Even when he hurt me, wept afterward, or crept into bed to hold me as he sobbed into my hair, I barely noticed. How could I? I was sitting in my cozy living room, watching Looney Tunes and eating my favorite cereal while the sun came up. I was happy there. No one, not even Philip, could touch me. While I was happy, it got to the point where I couldn't even remember anything he told me or differentiate one injury from another. But I do remember the day he broke the fingers on my right hand. He cried because I loved to play the violin, and with broken fingers, I would never play again. That made me laugh. That's why I remember it, because it made me laugh until I gagged. Of all the things to worry about while you're torturing your girlfriend to death, suddenly that's what breaks you. That was actually it, though. It really is what broke him. After that, Philip told the mirror he couldn't hurt me anymore, that he would never hurt me again. For some reason, that pulled me out of my pocket room. Just as I surfaced, he left. I tried to go back inside myself, but couldn't. The door to the pocket room was locked, so I stared at the mirror, crying weakly as waves of pain drowned me. As I faded out, the mirror flickered to brightness, just like a TV, and I saw another story. 2 men in military uniforms, cut off from their squad and hiding from enemies. One was a monster of a man, a quintessential soldier. The other was his opposite, small and badly wounded. He expected the big one to leave him. I expected the big one to leave him. Instead, the big one bundled the small one in his own jacket and kept watch for hours while the wind screamed and enemies trekked by, oblivious. He built a small fire and used it to cauterize the small one's wound. When the coast was clear, he hoisted the little one onto his back and carried him for hours until they caught up with their squadron. No one got hurt. No one betrayed anyone. No one died. The two of them stayed best friends until the day the big one died. It was a good ending, a happy one, and I knew, as that story faded away, that it wasn't the only happy one. I focused on the mirror, willing it to show me something else, something good. It did. And a third time, and a fourth, again, and again and again, all day long. When Philip came back, he apologized. I got weak. I'm sorry. That was unfair to you. I have to be strong to break our tie for good. From now on, I will be. I saw that he had a hatchet with him. The truth flooded out of me. All of the good, stories, all of the love, every last detail of every last happy life. Where did you see this? He asked. In your mirror, I said. For the last time in his life, Philip had a breakdown, but unlike his other breakdowns, this one felt right, positive, like an earthquake shattering. The hole in which he'd fallen, and he was riding back to the surface on a tidal swell of broken earth, like he was finally coming back to himself, like a spell had broken. Once it broke, he ran to me and started untying my restraints. But then the mirror spoke again, something ancient and deep and awful, something that made my bones thrum. The mirror blazed to a flat, brilliant, shimmering darkness. Philip threw it to the ground, shattering it. The broken glass shot upward and whirled impossibly, like a tornado. Pieces spun out, cutting Philip, embedding themselves in the walls. One huge shard flew at me. I saw Philip's reflection for an instant, and then my own, right before it lodged itself in my stomach. I felt it cut my pocket room. I felt the contents spill into my bloodstream. The storm stopped. Shards fell to the floor, like shining rain, thudding on the carpet, clattering against the glass still clinging to the frame. As I watched, the floor inside the frame flickered and vanished, transforming into a void, a bottomless black tunnel, just like in the cartoons I watched in my pocket room. Shining white hands rose out of the mirror, tunnel, and gripped the frame as Philip reached for me. If my pocket room had not been cut, I would have reached for him too. I would have pulled him close, away from the glimmering black tunnel and those shining monster hands, but my pocket room had been cut. Everything inside it, all the hate, all the pain, all the rage, for Philip and for everyone, and everything else, was surging through me now. I'd been torn open. I had become a passageway, a door, a portal, not just for my own pain, but for the suffering of each and every life we'd been cursed to share. When he saw my expression, he crawled back. Glass crunched under his hands. He left smeary handprints of blood on the carpet. He backed into the broken mirror. The moment he touched it, those shimmering white hands grabbed him and pulled him down into that insane tunnel. I shot upward, spinning back like a retracting yo-yo past the empty mirror frame and into the bloodstained bedroom. The room tilted and swam, and every nerve in my body screamed in agony. But I forced myself to crawl to the phone. I dialed the police. This part will sound insane, more insane than everything I've already told you. While I waited for the ambulance, the shimmer-handed monster spoke to me from the shard of mirror still embedded in my stomach. It was impossible to make him let you go, it said. I fought to steady my voice. Is it broken? I gasped. The soul tie. Is it broken? There is no soul tie. That was a lie. I'd tell many lies. Even the lives I showed him were lies. Most of them weren't even yours. Tears welled in my eyes as despair washed over me. Did he end it, at least? Like he wanted to? That's all he ever wanted. Is it over now? No, the voice replied. Didn't you hear what he told you? Nothing is over. It will never be over. Not until the last star dies for the very last time. I screamed at it, furious, but it didn't respond. It never spoke to me again, which honestly is rude as hell, especially considering that it still crawls out of the tunnel, its mirror cut into my stomach from time to time. If you're not interested in my office drama, you can skip this part. It won't make much sense anyway. But if you are, here's what happened. After the interview, I was a wreck, so I decided to see Numa. I didn't particularly want company, but Christophe looked as worn down as I felt. So I asked him to come along. He declined. So I went alone. Numa was my first patient, and still one of my favorites, though he isn't much of a talker. I interview him monthly, and progress has been slow but steady. The agency recently acquired an injured puma cub, which I'd presented to Numa the day before. Long story short, they were getting along, famously. Numa had already named her cub. I watched them play for a while before heading back upstairs. As usual, Mikey was waiting for me, but this time I was ready for him. I made eye contact immediately and asked, "What's on your mind?" "There are 5 wards in the Pantheon," he replied quickly, as though the words were on the tip of his tongue. "Ward 1, where we're at? It's kind of like fancy ADSEG, or federal prison. I know about both. I guess you do too. Just from the opposite side of the cell door." "What else?" I pressed. "I was supposed to be A-class. And you were supposed to be my sidekick. Seems redundant if you ask me. But admin liked the idea. But I messed it up. That's why you're stuck with Charlie. Sorry. I filed this information away. Why do you want me to be best friends with Christoph?" Mikey's expression shifted. It was like he put up a shield. Not enough to stop me from compelling him to answer, but enough to give the truth without giving the whole truth. Because he's a company man for a company, he holds in contempt. He gets punished when he obeys and punished when he doesn't. He needs someone to convince him he fits in. You're different than him, but not that different. That means you can convince him he fits in. Why can't you do that? I've tried, I can't, but I think you can. I pushed for more information, but Mikey resisted. People try to resist me all the time. No one ever succeeds, except Mikey was succeeding. Christoph suddenly stormed in, breaking my concentration. I felt Mikey slip through my grasp. "Wait here," Mikey said, then followed Christoph out. I stood there for several moments, waiting patiently. Then a thought struck me. What the hell am I doing? Thoroughly spooked, I spun around and followed them. I couldn't find Mikey, but Christoph was brooding in the empty conference room. He reeked of evergreens, as if he'd just come from the woods. The scent was oddly comforting. "What do you want?" he asked without looking at me. "You should go see Numa," I said. "He named the mountain lion cub." "Of course he did." I hesitated, trying to think of what to say. If I could just get him to look at me, I could make him talk. About what, I didn't know. But it would come to me. It always did. Finally, I asked about the mirror shards. Didn't they ever ask you to track them down? They did. Couldn't you? Of course I could. I told them I couldn't. That made me laugh. I can't say I'm grateful for much here, but I'm pretty grateful to not have to worry about getting sliced up by pieces of a magic mirror, and that's all thanks to you. It is? My patience wore thin. Christoph would look at me. He did. What did they do to you downstairs? His answer was layered with the same deflection I'd gotten from Mikey. They make me into what they need. And what do they need? A vicious dog? Who does bad things for his bad rewards? His face contorted slightly, just enough to compromise the humanity in it. His eyes took on the mirror-like shine I despised. You don't have to make me talk. I will answer what you ask.